So again, one of the easiest and most cost-effective ways of manipulating people and making them do as you want, even making them think as you want, is by meddling with language and changing the meanings of words. In this way, you can persuade gullible folk that black is white and that they are completely wrong about things which they thought that they knew. This is useful if you wish to change society, while pretending at the same time that nothing has really changed in society and that anything that the people that think it is, it's just in their heads. I gave an example of this last week when a local authority in the Scottish city of Glasgow said that primary schools in their area were not just for teaching small children, but were family community education hubs where adults as well as children under the age of 12 would be taught. A similar idea is now being pushed by the United Nations and enthusiastically taken up in this country. There has always been a sharp and unmistakable difference between violence and the use of images and words. Cartoons are not acts of violence, and neither are harsh and abusive words. Let's just check that we're not mistaken about this. I have two fairly authoritative dictionaries here, the Oxford Dictionary of English and one published by Collins, both are fairly recent editions. Let's just check what violence is according to the. Oh, here we are. Violence. Behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. Yeah, physical force. In other words, violence is something that actually happens in real life. Let's have a look. I've got Collins here. Let's see what Collins has to say on the subject. I should have looked this up beforehand, had it ready at hand. Violence, the use of physical force usually intended to cause injury or destruction. There we are. That's pretty much what I thought, and also I'm guessing what most viewers thought too, that violence is actually a physical process, the use of force against somebody while you are both present. It may, of course, be unpleasant if people say horrible things to you or publish images which offend you, or if somebody shouts something rude at you, but those things don't constitute violence. They do not entail the use of physical force, you see, which is the essence of violence. The United Nations, though, and also our own government, have decided to redefine violence without admitting that they have done so. And so it is now possible to be violent simply by sending a text message or email, which sounds pretty mad until you become aware of the concept of digital violence. In the description to this video, I give a link to a document published a few days ago by the United Nations, which is called Unite to End Digital Violence Against All Women and Girls. Click on the link and see what you make of this. Let me read out the opening paragraphs, which, amid all the meaningless waffle, contain two words which should set alarm bells ringing. Ready? See if you can identify those two fatal words. Digital technologies and artificial intelligence hold immense potential for human development and for progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, but they are also fueling new risks that disproportionately harm women and girls. From deep fakes to coordinated online harassment, digital violence is exacerbating the existing patterns of violence and creating new forms of abuse, and it's accompanied by increased conflict and fragility, the climate emergency, shrinking civil space, and eroding gender equality and the rule of law. Urgent, coordinated action is needed to protect rights, strengthen accountability, and safeguard democratic values. Well, the author has managed to squeeze in a lot of stock phrases here, even mentioning climate change. But there's nothing actually about violence. The gist of it is that people sometimes send unpleasant material via the internet to women, and that this is not at all nice, which is perfectly true. The two words which immediately set my antennae twitching were strengthen and accountability, which, because we're talking about stuff sent on the internet, means simply laws and regulations which will restrict what we can use the internet for and will give governments an excuse to poke their noses into our private business conducted online. Britain is specifically mentioned in this initiative. I quote, in Denmark, Italy, New Zealand, Poland, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States, 23% of women aged 18 to 55 reported online abuse or harassment. Well, that may well be true. And like most people, I regard the online abuse of women as disgusting. But this is not violence. Carry on reading, and we come to the crux of the matter. Reforms must include robust enforcement capacity and institutional coordination, dedicated financial resources, and clear pathways to justice. The United Nations supports countries in advancing these priorities through comprehensive legal reviews, national strategies, and policy developments. In other words, all this talk about violence against women perpetrated online, the so-called digital violence, is no more than a stalking horse to justify new laws and regulations to control the internet. We've already seen the introduction of such laws here in Britain, as well as the use of older laws. Apart from the Online Safety Act, we are increasingly seeing people prosecuted under the 1988 Malicious Communications Act. This is all part of an effort across the world to try and control the internet. If the United Nations simply announced that they wished to do such a thing, then there would be an uproar. So they have instead chosen to devise the extraordinary idea of digital violence. By suggesting that violence may be inflicted upon women via their laptops and mobiles, it is hoped that people will be so shocked that they will agree quickly to greater control over what they can say and do online. After all, if you're not one of those people who abuses or harasses women online, what possible objection could you have to such measures? That they will entail anybody so much as sending an email having his or her identity recorded and age established is a minor detail. No more anonymous Gmail accounts. If you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear. I had not until this week ever heard before of this phrase, digital violence, but I quite see how useful it might be for those hoping to regulate the internet. I will end by suggesting that viewers ask themselves if they really believe for a moment that it is possible to inflict violence upon anybody by means of YouTube videos, TikTok, emails, and so on. You might, I suppose, encourage violence, but that material sent electronically can by itself be seen as violence is a novel and unwelcome development in semantics.